Hi everyone, thank you for coming this morning. My name's Brianna. Just out of curiosity, who here has attended an LCA Linux conference? Probably about half of the people. And who has poked around or contributed to the Zookeepr code? Okay, so this is pretty much the Zookeepr row just here, and one over there. And I know everyone here has gone through using web-based conference management system. And basically what this talk is an invitation to people to consider contributing to this as an open source project. So it's not a technical deep dive into this project. And this might be best suited if you had just spent the 2 sessions this morning at the Python 101 Plus. So if you're the type of person who has founded your own project or projects, this is probably not for you, but you might learn something new while you're here. So Zookeepr is the name of the system which is used by Linux Australia for their annual conference, which is called linux.conf.au or LCA. And Linux Australia is also sponsoring this conference or supporting this conference, although not with software. And so it's really been developed over the past 4 or 5 years as a very LCA specific thing. So it's the classic open source scratch your own itch. And the itch is we want to run a conference and we need some software to get everyone registered and organise all the papers. And so we're going to write it ourselves. And it actually has a history of, I think initially there was some PHP scripts, and then the next year there was some Perl, and then the next year there was some Python. And the Python has actually managed to stick for a few years now, which is definitely good for stability. And we've managed to collectively resist the urge to rewrite everything every single year. So it handles all the basic stuff that you would expect: call for papers or presentations, proposals, attendee registration, invoicing people so that they actually pay you, and scheduling the talks. And it's licensed under the GPL. So from a Python perspective, it's using the Pylon's model view controller framework, which I believe is now a little bit behind, and at some point we'll have to look at moving to Pyramid. So it's very good that later today there's a talk about Pyramid. Maybe there'll be some Zookeepr people paying attention there. You know, blah, 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 normal stuff. This is all pretty average for a web-based project. So the first year it was used was in Sydney in 2007, and since then it's stuck, and people have just applied a different theme each year. But each year has had a little bit extra development added to it. But you can see the basic look is quite similar. And next year in January it'll be held in Ballarat. That's coming up. So it initially started out just with the very basic stuff, the stuff that you need to get done, and since then each year a little bit more has been added to expand it and to meet more of the needs. And there is still, I think, plenty of functionality which is missing. Because LCA is a very technical conference and is run by people who are very technical, usually they don't tend to have that much of a problem with being told that they should write an SQL query to achieve something, whereas generally as a user of web-based software I wouldn't expect that that's a reasonable way to get something done. And so more and more of these things are actually having a nice front end put on them. Obligatory UML diagram. I don't know. I think all this really tells you is that there's a bit going on. I don't think it's horrendously, there's not too many crossing lines that I'm too worried about there. It's kind of complicated enough to be interesting, but not so complicated that you couldn't get your head around it. So the user roles for people who sign up to it as an application look a bit like that. So you can see that some of the functionality is quite LCA specific and is not necessarily that useful at this point to all conferences. So one of the features about LCA is that they tend to get a lot more applications or proposals than they actually accept, and so they need to have a quite detailed review process where they have multiple people who are on the paper reviewer committee putting comments and ratings on each of the proposals, because they need to whittle it down quite seriously. I think they get in the order of 5 times more papers than they actually end up accepting. Whereas if you have a small conference or if you're a small event and you're just starting out, chances are you're not going to need that kind of infrastructure. Possibly you can get away with a manually updated Google Doc, or maybe you don't need anything at all. And the mini-confs are also a feature that not all conferences have. So LCA runs with 2 days, generally 2 days of mini-confs plus 3 days of the regular conference. So if PyCon had mini-confs, it might be like Django mini-conf, Pyramid mini-conf, scientific programming mini-conf. So they're days where the schedule is organised by a separate person and they just have a narrower focus. And so mini-conf organisers obviously need to be able to contribute to the schedule and arrange their stuff as well, and they're kind of separate to the core team. So I think one of the big features or the areas where Zookeepr really stands out is in the admin functionality. And as a person who had used it as a conference attendee and as someone, attending PyCon this year, I don't think you necessarily appreciate the complexity of running a conference. So when I started to look into the reports that Zookeepr provides, you start to see what kind of questions the conference organisers would have and what kind of questions they need answers to. And, this is just some of them. And you can see there's going to be concerns about funding, there's concerns about have people signed up for, actually completed the process all the way through, or did they get stuck? Have the papers been sorted out? Have funding arrangements been sorted out? So if you're a conference that offers some funding support for your speakers, so they generally don't pay for their ticket and they might need financial assistance to attend or accommodation assistance, then you need to manage that budget and manage those requests as well. And then even, during the conference, you want to be able to set up your schedule, and then if anything has changed, you need to be able to update that quickly. And even after the conference, when you're releasing your videos, there's a thing in there to say, or who didn't agree to do the video release so that you don't accidentally publish their video, and who, we need a little XML snippet to produce for the start caption of their video that says what their talk is. These are just kind of like little niceties that you could do manually depending on the size of your conference, or you could kind of whip something up to do it, like write your own query. But because Zookeepr has now been used for quite a few years, it's just starting to accrete these features, which is a good thing for the ongoing conference organisers. And so this conference is not explicitly an open source conference. There's lots of people here who would be using Python not for open source or for closed source for their work or whatever reason, but there's still, a close association with the open source community, and I thought it might be worth spending a little bit of time talking about, why that's a good thing, why it's worth contributing to it, and why this project in particular would be a good starting place if you are not already in that space. So if I was thinking about what would I look for in a project that I was contributing to for the first time, I would think, okay, I want it to be in Python because I love writing Python. I want it to be established because for a first timer coming to these kind of things, having a blank slate can be quite a scary thing, and having to come up with all the architecture yourself is just kind of a case of, I don't know where to start. So if you come to something that has already got those kind of basic building blocks in place, it can be a lot easier to see how to combine those to produce some new feature rather than having to come up with them all by yourself. But at the same time, you want something that has a decent-sized user base, because I think just there's so much satisfaction to be had from writing software which actually has users. Like, there's so much software written that has no users or has a user base of one, and that's you. And so that can be a drawback from doing your own thing. I mean, it depends what you care about, but I certainly get a lot of satisfaction out of knowing that what I write is used, and, you know, in this case, not just used, but it's going to be used by some of the biggest geeks in Australia. So this is a photo of one of the Linux conferences. They get up to, I think, 700 attendees now. So they're not, you know, when they're signing up to register, they're not exactly giving you a code review, but if you do something really stupid, you're gonna know about it. And one of the things that I think about, you know, the Linux conference and this conference is that we're talking all the time about best practices and what are the best ways to achieve everything. And we have all these awesome ideas, but in this particular project, you know, we're not necessarily putting them all in place. And I think that's a bit of a shame, and it would be really nice if this project was like a beacon, like we're doing everything the way that we tell people that it should be done, and, you know, this is how you do it. And the other thing I put up there was you can meet other developers. So it's just kind of nice to actually, if you're other developers in Australia, you can actually meet them on IRC at a time that is not like 3 a.m. It's actually really nice. And you can come to a conference like this or a conference like LCA, or even just arrange a meetup in your capital city and actually meet someone face-to-face. And I just appreciate the opportunity to do that. That may not be important to everyone. So, as I said, there is quite a bit of functionality which is available, but at the same time there are large areas where I think it's not so established and mature that if you jump in, you're just going to be doing trivial bug fixes or stepping on anyone else's toes. There's like large areas where I think people could make a really, go for broke and really put their stamp on something to add some great new functionality to it. So the first case being testing. We have some nose tests, but it's generally an underloved area that could do with a lot of work. Up-to-date idiomatic Python. I think one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to this audience about Zookeepr is because a lot of the people who've worked on Zookeepr and who work on Zookeepr are like awesome hardcore developers, but wouldn't necessarily call themselves Pythonistas, or they're not full-time, Python junkies. And so they're not necessarily keeping up to date with what is the latest best practice in Python. And so, for example, we're using pylons, not even version 1. So we need to get to pylons 1, and then we need to get to pyramid, because apparently pylons is not even used anymore, or, it's not the way of the future. And it's the same with Python language features. I would doubt that we're using all the latest nice stuff in 2.7 or 3. So having people who would consider themselves Python junkies, I think, will be a really great thing for the project. And you'll get a chance to insert lots of nice Python idioms, I think. Un-LCA-ification, as I mentioned, it's very much structured around the way LCA is run. And so if PyCon were to adopt it, there would be several things that you would need to either, make optional, strip out, and there may be other things that you would want to add instead. Proposal selection. So there's a lot of work done around reviewing proposals and viewing the overall set of reviews that have been done and which have been the highest rated. And then they tend to have one day which is called face-to-face, where they decide, okay, what is the final list that we're going to have. But then, marking those in Zookeepr is not, the UI for that is not necessarily there. And even, choosing your papers is not the end of the story, because you still need to confirm that your speakers are actually going to attend. So there's a lot of confirmation that has to happen with people all along the way. I think there's a little bit of work still to do there. And with the scheduling, so the schedule is now, as of the last couple of years, can be constructed in Zookeepr, but it would be really nice to add some kind of, drag and drop things around to move talks to different rooms and make sure there's no clashes and that kind of thing. That would be really nice. And there's a lot of reports, but it would be great to have a kind of visual dashboard in the way that you might have with Nagios or something. It's kind of like, what's the health of your conference like? So how are your call for papers going? How are your sign-ups going? Do you need to be recruiting more people to do certain tasks? And you could even, be checking the, semantic analysis of tweets about your conference to see if people are loving it or hating it or something. So that would be really nice. An integrated mobile interface is, again, something that would not be very hard. Last year, someone did one, but I think they did it in Django, and so it was not exactly integrated. So that's, just something that would be really nice to have. And personalised schedule for attendees / presentation feedback. I think OzCon in the US have this kind of stuff where basically you, as an attendee, you pick out which sessions you're planning to go to, and then you can, give feedback ratings, and that would actually be super useful to next year's review, next year's team, to know which talks were actually popular, which speakers were not as good as we had hoped, because at the moment all that is basically word of mouth and impressionistic. So if that was actually built in, it would actually be a really concrete way for your conference to, learn from itself and improve from year to year. So if you think you might like to join us and be a Zookeepr, then you should grab the source, which is off GitHub. We just moved to GitHub this year. We were previously using Bazaar and Launchpad. And so, I don't know, even if you're not a GitHub experienced or Git experienced person, I don't think we're doing anything very radical. There's heaps of tutorials that you can follow about contributing to GitHub. We have a mailing list, Zookeepr Developer, which you should sign up for, and IRC, and there's the issue tracker if you are interested in having a look at some of the stuff that has been reported that's kind of separate to my wish list there. So that could be a place to grab something small. And I mean, certainly installing it and getting it running on your laptop, I don't think it will be hard to find stuff where you're like, yeah, I could tweak that a little bit and be a little bit nicer, especially if you have a bit of JavaScript foo. I think it could be very nice. So I'd like to thank James, who gave a Zookeepr presentation, and I've borrowed a little bit of his material. And thank you for listening, and I guess we'll take any questions.
Yep.
Are you running a sprint this weekend?
I don't know, are we running a sprint? We might sit around and other people might sit around with us. How about we do that?
Let's start a sprint.
Yeah? Maybe?
We might have to upgrade our sprints to a bigger room. That's not a problem.
How do you approach this really delicate line of making something that's suitable for LCA and that sort of conference, and making it general for more suitable for smaller or larger or different topic type conferences?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't think the Zookeepr team has an especially great idea about that, because it's still very much LCA focused. So I think initially there's stuff that obviously we just need to decouple a little bit and make it really easy to plug in for LCA, but then other conferences, you know, on one hand you can say, well, there's all those options, you can just ignore them, but it's just quite overwhelming, especially if you were to use this for a non-technical conference. You might be quite overwhelmed, and so you should just, you know, be starting with the bare minimum, which might be like the call for papers, the registration and the schedule, I would say. So I think we don't know the answer to that yet.
Right. Anyone else with questions? Well, I think you've certainly got my vote for migrating over to Zookeepr for PyCon next year. I'm sure you have a lot of votes from the audience as well.
If we migrate, maybe next year someone will give a talk, well, why Zookeepr sucks and we should move back.
No, I've spoken to the guys who are running next year, and they're pretty keen to move over. So
cool.
It's great to get your perspective. I have, here we are, a delightful PyCon AU mug as a token of our appreciation. And yeah, thank you once again for coming and telling us all about it.
Thank you.